Hello, and welcome to the Sailing and Cruising the East Coast of the United States podcast. I'm Bela Musits.
And I'm Mike Wasserman.
Hey, Mike. Today's guest on the podcast is Mark Gabrielson. Mark is an accomplished sailor who has raced in some Corinthian sailboat races. What does Corinthian mean? It means amateur, no paid crew or captain. He's also an author, and he's written two very, very interesting books. One is called Dear Isles, Undefeated America's Cup Cruise, Humble Heroes from a Downeast Island. And the other book is Corinthian Resolve, the story of the Marion-Bermuda Race. I thought my conversation with Mark was fascinating. I learned a lot. He's really a very accomplished sailor and a great author.
Yeah, Bela, this should be interesting. And we've had several authors on the show over the years, and people who are storytellers by trade usually make great guests because they know how to tell a story. But I think today listeners should look out for a wide range of interesting nuggets about history, about racing, about single-handed sailing, and about Maine, which is one of my favorite places in the U.S. And he tells a great story about how he got into sailing.
Agreed, Mike. So let's jump right into my conversation with Mark. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Bela. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, sure. Hey, so let me ask you a question. If you're at a social event, a non, I'll use the word work-related social event, so a social event where people don't know who you are, you get introduced to somebody, and after that introduction, they say to you, "Oh, Mark, very nice to meet you. What do you do?" How do you answer that question?
Well, at the moment, since I'm retired from full-time work, I would probably answer that I'm a sailor and I write books about it. So maybe the easy answer is a maritime history writer and active sailor. So that would be the shorthand.
That's a perfect answer for this podcast. Yeah. So what are your sort of first memories of sailing?
Barnegat Bay, New Jersey, when I was about 5 years old, and I was out in a town class sloop with my dad, and the boat was named Wet Smack. And we went aground off of Tom's River. And in Barnegat Bay, if you went aground, it wasn't disastrous. It was actually a little bit fun. And we couldn't get the boat off the mud, so we walked ashore. So, it was thin water sailing, but a great way to learn how to sail. And I started very, very young.
I asked that question to a lot of people, a lot of guests on this show, and many of them have a similar answer. I was out with my dad, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, something like that. And so clearly the family influence or your acquaintances, right, influence what you do as a child. I mean, that's pretty clear. But I'm wondering, if you have any thoughts on this, what's the future of sailing, given that there's so many different things to do in the world these days, right, that are all fighting for our time, and that so many sailors are brought into the sport because of someone they know or a relative. What do you think? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think the issue for sailing is both time and economics, but looking beyond that, which are kind of the easy answers, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think that as a kid, if we have a pleasant experience or a series of pleasant experiences on a boat or sailboat, we're going to we'll remember that. And when we do have the economic and time opportunity to do it again, we'll go do it. So I do, and it's not family necessarily. In my case, it was because I had a dad and a mom who liked to sail, but even kids getting involved in yacht club or youth sailing programs, who have a fun social experience, that's where their buddies are, that's where they have fun and the coaches don't yell. I think that's the kind of thing that imprints on us. And then someday when we have the chance, maybe it's when we're young and maybe when we're not so young, we go back to it. I mean, it's a beautiful, pleasant thing 99% of the time. And so most kids should have a positive experience if they just get the chance to get in a boat with somebody they like.
Right. Right.
So I think that's it. I think it's the social aspects and the fact that it can be very, very fun for,
Yes.
for a young person.
Yes.
I hope, you look at these opti fleets out in Narragansett Bay or elsewhere, and the kids are yelling at each other and they're having a great time and they're banging into each other and stuff. It's a hoot for them. And they'll remember that even if they have to go away from it to earn a living for a while before they can
Right.
afford to do it again.
Right. And it's also to me one of these endeavors or sports where it's really pretty easy to do. I mean, in an hour, I can have you out there sailing a boat, and
Right.
But if you want to, you can spend your whole life kind of working out the subtleties and the nuances of sailing. Right. So there's this broad spectrum of engagement that's possible. And there's not a lot of activities that are like that. There are some, but sailing is certainly one of those, both from an intellectual perspective and from an economic perspective, if you still want to.
Right. Well, a lot of people have worked very hard to make sailing affordable for a broad spectrum of people.
Yes.
If you have access to water, you can go sailing. Pond, lake, some rivers, and certainly saltwater. And I don't know how many, but 80% of the American population lives within a mile of some body of water or something like that. I've read. So you're right. I think it's a question of really wanting to do it. And the question, then is, why do you want to do it? And usually it involves people. I don't know a lot of sailors who said, you know what, I want to get away from it all and just go off by myself and go over the horizon. That comes a little later in life, perhaps. But for kids and young people, it's really having fun, and you have fun with other people. And like you said, it's a sport you can pick up fairly quickly, at least the basics of it. Going downwind, going upwind's a little trickier, but you can make it. And then when you get into the refinement, like any sport, then it becomes much more of a real, kind of competitive situation. But that also can be fun. That could be fun too.
Right. Yeah. Excellent. So after running aground and walking to shore, what sort of came next in sort of your sailing exploits?
Well, I think a lot of people, you sail as a kid, and then you start taking school seriously and your early career seriously. So I did have the good fortune to have a father who liked to sail. So even while I was at school and getting to going in my career, I could still go sailing with him every once in a while. So it became very occasional. But I reached a stage in life where I could go out and buy a boat. So I went out and bought a boat. And that was in, 2001, I guess. 2000 or 2001. And interestingly, I was married at that time with 2 children, and 9/11 happened.
Mm-hmm.
We lived in southwestern Connecticut at the time, and that event touched us. It touched us personally, not directly. I didn't lose any family members or anything, but I did lose some friends. And in fact, we went up on a hill in Reading, Connecticut, and we could see the smoke coming up from Manhattan. So my wife said to me, you know what, we need to go we need to do the going over the horizon thing just to get our heads back in order here.
Yeah.
So we did a whole lot of sailing with that boat that we had just purchased. Both just the couple, the 2 of us, as well as with our 2 children. And there again, it was wonderful. So it really started in terms of, for me, for the bigger boat sailing, the blue water sailing started, unfortunately, with that kind of event. But it was meaningful and helpful to us. It was really quite therapeutic, frankly. So
yeah. What kind of boat was it?
Well, we got really, really lucky with our first boat purchase. We found an old, they're all old now, but an old Hinckley Sou'wester 50 yawl, which was a lot of boat for a 4-person family, but we managed and learned together, and
beautiful boat.
Great time. It's a gorgeous boat. big, heavy boat, very safe, could go anywhere on the planet. And we sailed it all over the East Coast, from Canadian Maritimes down to New York and beyond. You know, been to Bermuda. So she was, she is a comfortable boat. We had her for 21 years. It was really the family boat. So.
Yeah. So I'm always interested in Long Island Sound up to Maine and the Maritimes, Nova Scotia, maybe. What are some of your favorite spots?
Well, it really does focus on Maine. Maine is unbelievable as far as sailing is concerned. Now, then the next line is you say, well, you got to avoid the lobster pots. So there is that. I mean, it's very much a multi-use water space. So you got to take it for what it is. But Maine is our go-to place. And I have to say, right off of Stonington on Deer Isle, there's an area called Merchant Row. And it's the chain of islands, or a group of islands between Isle Ho and Deer Isle. And I have been, like I said, all up and down the East Coast and offshore and stuff. And I cannot think of a better, more beautiful place to sail. However, it is loaded with lobster pots because Stonington is the #1 by value lobster port in the United States of America. And by fishing, I think it's like #2 or 3 because lobsters are valuable. So you get a lot of, floating candy out there. And, but that aside, it is the most gorgeous area. I do like coming down to the Cape and Islands, although the water gets a little thin for us because we now have a boat that draws 7 feet. And it kind of limits what we can do in certain places, but that's not significant. Yeah. But I would go for Maine any day. And the Canadian Maritimes are nice because you kind of have a Maine-like environment, but no lobster pots, because they generally fish in the winter up there. And so that would be my strong #2, Nova Scotia, particularly. So there you go. That's
very nice.
That's my cruising.
Yeah, I've sailed past Maine on the way back from Nova Scotia. But Nova Scotia is gorgeous. Yeah, it's very nice. So, given all your sailing in Maine, do you have a secret way of getting a lobster pot untangled from your boat?
Yeah, like they say about what do you do if you fall overboard? You say, don't fall overboard.
Right.
Right. So the answer is don't foul it. But yeah, you can foul it no matter what you do. And stop the boat. We tow a dinghy, and this is I think a little bit odd because I see a lot of davits and dinghies hanging off davits on particularly blue water boats and bigger boats. And so to your listeners, I would say think hard about that. We tow a dinghy, and we tow it on a long painter. And the reason we do that is if I were, God forbid, to fall overboard, basically I already have a life sling in the water with that dinghy. And what we do is we rig this is a little off your question, but I want to explain why I have a dinghy hanging out there. Is we have a boarding ladder, a Plastimo boarding ladder that you can grab from the water and pull over the side of the dink and climb up into the dink. So I've got like 60 feet of time between when I go over and to get to that painter line, work my way to the dink, get in the dink, and then I pull myself back aboard. We've never done this, but it's really nice to know that it can be done. Mm-hmm. So point 1 about lobster pots, I tow a dinghy, unless I'm going way offshore, in which case I bring it aboard. But so you get in the dink and you have to diagnose. And I have basically a plastic, think of a clear plastic cookie jar or something like that, like 12 inches deep and 6 inches around, or 9 inches deep, 6 inches around, 6 inches diameter. And if you hold that in the water, you get a wonderful view of what's going on underneath, right? So you have a visualization thing. Yeah. You can look at it and you say, oh, wow, I'm just on the rudder, or I'm on the blade of the prop, or God forbid, it's fouled around the prop shaft itself. you have to diagnose, which is either push, pull, or cut. And that's all boat hook. That's all on the boat hook. And you get it off. But it is tricky because the first thing you got to do is stop the boat, because and if you're in a tough current situation or a tough wind situation, it's really hard. And that happens to us probably once every other season. So we sail 30 to 60 days in Maine every summer, and I've in 2 years fouled one pot. And so as you get kind of used to the environment, you're able to avoid that situation a lot. You have to be vigilant, and it's a real pain in the neck in fog, but it's always worth it when you end up where you are there.
Yeah. Do you ever sail at night?
Yeah. I don't sail coastal Maine at night.
Okay.
Because of the pot issue. The only navigation issue in Maine is lobster pots, and they're rocks, and they're currents, and there's this and that. Everything's well marked. If you have a decent Garmin, a chart plotter of any kind, you're fine. And interestingly, there's always help around. The lobstermen are very, people complain about lobstermen, but I find that they are the most wonderful, supportive, helpful people if you just know how to call them. But night sailing is a little tough in Maine because of the pots. So I've made landfall in Maine, of course, at night, but that's just coming in and picking up a mooring or dropping the hook and going to bed.
Yeah. Interesting. So earlier you mentioned having sailed to Bermuda. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so that would be in 2010. I got interested in the trip, the 645-mile shot to Bermuda from New England. And it was really just a sense of it represented the next step in sailing for me. This was a way to go a distance offshore and deal with preparation in the Gulf Stream and provisioning and night watches and things like that. But I wanted to do it in the context of, I didn't want to just sail to Bermuda. I wanted to do it in the context of a shall we say, an accompanied group because of safety issues. So I looked at the Marion-Bermuda Race, and the Marion-Bermuda Race is specifically designed for amateur Corinthian sailors, unpaid sailors, which clearly is what I am. And so I started nosing around that idea and found one of the co-sponsors of it is something called the Blue Water Sailing Club, which is a New England-based virtual club. So I joined that, and that gave me a network of friends who could join me. And in fact, when we did the first race in 2011, the boat was myself and 5 other members of the Blue Water Sailing Club. So it was great. It was a great way to do it. We didn't do particularly well. It was a light wind race, and Lyra, our Hinckley Sou'wester 50, is not known for its light air performance. So, but we got there, and we also, decided from the start, because a good friend of mine there is a celestial navigator, is to go celestial. So we navigated to Bermuda using a sextant and the Nautical Almanac. And Steve Bussolari is his name, put us within about 10 miles of our, GPS position at the very end of the race. It was pretty awesome. So that was great. I mean, I had a great experience. The weather was nice. And like I said, it was light air. She didn't move very well through the water. Yeah. But it was fun. It was really fun. And all our wives flew down and met us there, and the clubs put on great parties, and we had the governor there and all sorts of things. And it was wonderful. It was really a wonderful experience. And then the sail back was great because when we ran out of wind, we could turn on the engine.
Was it the same crew on the way back?
Largely, yes. The folks wanted to come back, but I had a couple of people who wanted to fly down and then just do the sail back. So
yeah,
it was a very pleasant experience. And then I went again in 2013 with Lyra. We did much better. It was a heavier winded race. I think we took home one trophy on, combined time with the other two blue water boats. And then in 2015, I started sailing OPB, other people's boats. So I went on a friend of mine, another blue water friend who has a beautiful Hallberg Rassy sloop. And I was the celestial navigator on that. And then I went again in 2015. And that was a powerboat trip. And I can explain that later, but a friend of mine
No need to explain.
Well, I mean, I'm sorry. Sometimes we all make mistakes in life. And sometimes they're tragic and other times they're fun. But this was fun. And my friend wanted to take his Nordhaven across the ocean. So I said, well, why don't you go with the Marion-Bermuda Race to Bermuda and then hop from Bermuda over to the Azores and up. And so we took this Nordhaven down as kind of the safety communications boat for the fleet, 2015. And then he decided not to go to Europe, so I brought it back with him. So I had a round trip on the Nordhaven. And then 2017, I was OPB again on a guy's boat, a spectacular boat, owned by Bob Buck. And Bob was a lawyer. He retired, went to marine architecture school, designed a boat as his thesis, had it built, and raced it to Bermuda, and we won Class A.
Wow.
And, it was just a fabulous story. You should talk to Bob. He's a really interesting guy. And I was celestial navigator on that, and we almost won line honors Class A, but we won corrected Class A, so that was nice.
Wow.
So that's my Bermuda experience. Yeah.
Very, very nice. Now, you've written a couple books.
Yes, I have. Yeah, I've written 2 books now. Working on the third. First book was published in 2014, and it was about going back to Maine. Your question about Maine. It was about the 1895 and 1899 America's Cup campaigns, where all of the American crews came from Little Deer Isle, Maine. So they recruited the New York Yacht Club recruited the entire crews for Defender and then Columbia from Deer Isle, Maine. And so the question is, why? Why did they do that? Why did they go all the way out to Maine to find 25 or 30 fishermen to come down to New York and man these gigantic Hairsoft cutters? So I wrote a book about that called Deer Isle's Undefeated America's Cup Cruise. So that came out in 2014 through Arcadia Publishing, and it's still in print. I think we're on our 7th edition.
Oh, wow.
It's just a great story. It's just, it's sort of a fabulous story. And people, so I don't know, I can go on and on about it. Don't ask an author tell you about their books. But it's a wonderful story of kind of cultural contrast, and also people don't write about the crewmen in these boats. They write about the skippers and the syndicates and the sponsors and the controversy and all the drama. But these guys were awesome people, and amazing stories of what, the families that went there and stuff. It's just great, and lots of pictures too. So that was the first one.
So let's just stick on that for a little bit. I have a couple questions. Sure. So who was the driving force at the New York Yacht Club that said, okay, we got to recruit our crew members from up here in Maine?
Well, the organizer for the syndicate of the New York Yacht Club at that time was a guy named C. Oliver Islin, Ollie Islin, Iselin. He was on multiple America's Cup campaigns, defenses, the brains behind the operation. But Nathaniel Hairsoft was also involved, of course, and a very important. I mean, I could go on and on about him, but the respect that the club had for him and the club syndicate had for him was enormous. He was also a cantankerous, don't tell me what to do type of guy. he knew his trade, and he knew he knew he was a genius when it came to designing and building boats. So they took a kind of a hands-off approach, and they took a hands-off approach for crew selection as well. So the driver to go to Deer Isle to set up a desk at the Pilgrim Inn and interview sailors as they came in to, tell me who you are and what you're all about, was Hank Haff, who was the skipper in 1895. So Hank Haff was a experienced, big yacht sailor, skipper, and with a winning record. And until Charlie Barr came along, and he was in 1899, the young, Charlie Barr, Hank Haff really dominated the sport. And so I think it was a combination of Islin. Hairsoft didn't really care where the labor came from, but Hank Haff did. And he'd gotten to know a couple of Deer Isle sailors. They kind of came down onesie-twosies to sail big boats in New York and Long Island Sound. And he knew that these guys were hardworking, dedicated. They didn't drink, so he agreed to go up to Deer Isle to recruit these guys. And they came away with about 30 sailors who came down for what amounted to about a 6-month assignment in New York.
Yeah. So I'm curious, this was over 100 years ago, and it's not like some events that are well documented in the newspaper and all sorts of other places. How do you research a book like this?
Well, it was a long process, Bela. It was initially go to Deer Isle, and you go to the Deer Isle Stonington Historical Society. So if you're writing a book about some locale, always look for the Historical Society. And we kind of chuckle at them when we drive by. We say, oh, it's the Hysterical Society. But you know what? Those people sometimes have remarkably relevant and untapped documentary or physical pictorial evidence of what happened in some way.
Yeah.
And so I went to the Deer Isle Stonington Historical Society and spent a couple of days there going through boxes and boxes of mementos, because this was a story that was a big deal and still is on Deer Isle itself, which is a mid-sized island with about 4,000 people on it. But it had never been told nationally. So they were very proud of it. The people you talk to are descendants from the sailors. So I interviewed the grandson of, a sailor, and the granddaughter of a sailor. You could do that. So they were very willing and interested in sharing this to some clown from Boston who wanted to write a book about it. And so that's where you start. And then it networks. And any book about sailing has to go through the Mystic Seaport Museum archives, which are phenomenal. And I also went down to the New York Yacht Club, and Vanessa Cameron, who's the librarian there, was enormously helpful. And John Romanier, who has written, I don't know, 6 or 8 books, if not more, on sailing, is one of our best known maritime historians, yachting historians, was very helpful too. And I got into the America's Cup archives at the New York Yacht Club. And that's where you see things like letters from Nathaniel Hairsoft saying, kind of leave me alone. This is the way I'm going to do it.
Yes.
You get a sense of these people by getting to the primary sources like that.
Yeah.
So that's how I did it, and gathered enough. I also went to the UK because I wanted to see the other side of the story, and discovered a lot of interesting things over in the UK. Just as an aside, the 1895 campaign was the campaign of Lord Dunraven from Ireland, and he brought his Valkyrie over, and there was all sorts of controversy. In fact, this picture behind me is a Russ Kramer painting of what they call the foul in 1895, when Valkyrie hit Defender and displaced really a shroud, and There's all sorts of protests. And Dunraven accused the Americans of cheating, if you can imagine that, cheating in the America's Cup.
Unheard of.
And I went into their archives, and I went into other archives, and I found out that he probably was right, and so forth and so on, which gave the New York Yacht Club a little bit of a squirm. But yeah, I mean, once you find a primary source, like the Deer Isle Stonington Historical Society, you just sort of network off that. And give it enough time, and as a friend of mine likes to say, just gum it to death, and see what comes out.
Yeah. So I'm curious, did you go to the Hirschoff Museum also?
I did. Yes. Sorry, I should have mentioned that. Yes. Right. Excellent collection. Great, helpful people. A little thin because a lot of the Hirschoff material has been moved to MIT. But the Haffenreffer collection at MIT. But no, they were great. And in fact, invited me back to give a talk there, and it had a great turnout for that. And New York had me in to give a talk, and I sort of glossed over the cheating business.
Wisely so.
Yeah, and then surprisingly, they said, you ought to join this club. So anyway, I guess it didn't all go so bad. But so Hirschoff Museum in Bristol, Rhode Island, is fabulous. It's great. It's also the home of the America's Cup Hall of Fame.
Yes,
and that's worth visiting too.
Yeah. So we I keep our boats on Narragansett Bay, and one sort of day we stumbled across the museum and went through there. It was just wonderful. It was just, even for the layperson who really is, not a historian or anything, it was like, wow, this was unbelievable.
Yeah. Maritime museums are always fun, and that one it's a very narrow one, but it's very interesting. Yeah.
It was great. So you wrote another book as well.
I did. Yes.
Yeah.
That was this one's called Corinthian Resolve. So it's the amateur sailor demanding that we keep this up in the face of professionalization and corporatization of things. And that was actually not my idea. This was an idea of Alan McLean, who was at the time, the chairman or the big mahaf of the Marion-Bermuda Race organization. And he said, we're going to do a 25th running of the Marion-Bermuda Race in, let's see, that would have been 2017. So that was the 25th running of the race. So he said, I'd like somebody to take on the task of writing a history of the race. And he looked at me, because I was on the committee at the time. He looked at me and he said, somebody ought to take on the task of writing a history of this race.
He stared you in the eyes.
Stared me in the eye, and when Alan wants something, Alan gets what he wants. And in a very diplomatic way, but he's a very successful man, and he's very wise. So I said, okay. And so the second book was what I call a commissioned work, meaning somebody else has the idea, and here's the objective, and here's what we do. And I said, okay, I'll go do that. And it turned into a Mark Gabrielson project, because I just fell in love with the story of this little race, which next year it's going to be the 50th calendar anniversary of the race. So it started in 1977. So there again, Bela, what I did was I went to, it's a race co-sponsored by three entities: Blue Water Sailing Club, the Royal Hamilton Amateur Dinghy Club, RHADC, in Bermuda, in Hamilton, and the Beverly Yacht Club. And so what do? You go to the RHADC and you go to the Beverly Yacht Club. And Blue Water really doesn't have much in the way of archives, but they had some. And so I had the awful task of going to Bermuda, having to spend a few days down there and go through RHADC archives, which consisted of a series of cardboard boxes that had been stored in humid conditions with bugs in them. I mean, it was wonderful. You pull these files out of, the notice of race from 1977 or something, and this little critter comes out. It's like, oh, daylight. So one of the things I could do, incidentally, was organize their archives and put them in plastic totes and things like that. But, you just start unfolding each race and how it happened. But the best part was figuring out how this happened in the very first place. And historians like this, we encounter fascinating people with larger than life characters, with amazing existences when they were alive. And I, through this work, met Dickie Bird and Dave Kingery. And Dickie Bird was a Bermudian, larger than life character, veteran of the not the RAF. He would get very angry at me if I were to say Royal Air Force. He was in the Navy aviators group in World War II. Flew 7 different airplanes, off carriers. I mean, just an amazing guy. And he came to Bermuda, and he was a big character at the RHADC and in Hamilton. And he met this MIT professor who sailed in from a trip across the South Pacific through the Panama Canal and up to Bermuda, named Dave Kingery. And Dave was one of this nation's top academics in what at the time was a very important and growing field of ceramics technology. You may remember that NASA was using ceramics on things like the space shuttle and stuff. That's what Dave King, and there's a lab at MIT called the Kingery Lab, which is a materials science laboratory. So you got this, British aviator who's sort of ended up in Bermuda with this huge personality, gregarious guy, and this MIT scientist coming together on the docks of the RHADC, and they just a great friendship. And at one point, Kingery, I think, said to Dickie Bird, we called him Dickie Bird, why don't we do a race from my house to your house? And that opens the book, basically, because it says everything about the Marion-Bermuda Race. It's like, we're in this for the fun, we're in this for the sport, we're in this for the aesthetics of sailing, we're in this for family, we're in this for Marion and Bermuda. This isn't about big prizes. This isn't about spreads in performance sailing magazines. This isn't about sponsorship. It's not about raising money. It's not about impressing people. It's about doing sailing for what sailing's for. And so the beginning of the book is all about these two guys and how they, what their careers were and how they got together and did what they did. And it's a wonderful human story. And then I get into each race and the drama of each race. And some of them were pretty darn dramatic. So
yes,
it is the ocean. So
it is the ocean, and it's a scheduled event.
Yeah, right. Scheduled event, and Mother Nature doesn't listen to schedules.
Right. Right. So that was great what you said about the opening of the book, because I've always wondered why Marion.
Yeah. Right. Well, it was
because I've been there. I've been to the Beverly Yacht Club. Right. We spent a few days there once on the way back from Nova Scotia.
There you go.
And anchored next to Tabor Boy.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah,
we had a mooring right next to Tabor Boy. So
interestingly, Bela, the first race, 1977, Beverly Yacht Club was not involved.
Oh.
Dave Kingery was a member of both Blue Water and Beverly Yacht Club, and Beverly sort of said, "Not sure we really want to do this." Lo and behold, 120 boats signed up for the 1977 race. It was like,
wow,
they had to turn boats away. So needless to say, 1979, Beverly was happily a co-sponsor. So David really did this originally as a Blue Water Sailing Club member, I guess. And in fact, he'd organized a race in 1976 from Boston to Halifax, and you mentioned Halifax.
Yes.
a great destination to sail to. And so he organized, no, sorry, Marblehead to Halifax. It wasn't from Boston. It was from Marblehead to Halifax as kind of a test race. And he got great, same principles, cruising boats, prepared for sea, no paid crew, no paid skipper. He even was strict about things like communications and things like that. And that was a success. So he had a test case, and then he did the first 1977 Marion-Bermuda Race. And that was an enormous success. They really tapped into some need in sailing in the late 70s. And that need was just amateur cruising sailors on well-prepared boats going to sea. And it was amazing. And so Beverly came in 1979.
Yeah.
And helped, which has been fabulous, because there you have it's a small physical club, but it's a great platform to launch a friendly ocean race.
Yes. Oh, very good. Yeah. And the timing there was pretty good, right? Because the late 70s, 80s was sort of the heyday of sailing from many perspectives.
I touch on that a little bit in the book. Materials had gotten to a point where fiberglass was now
right. It was a big boom.
It was a boom. The boats were safer. They were, because of the new materials, they were more capable, I think. And you had a early sort of real early wave of people coming into sailing at this point. It was a growing activity, and a lot of people wanted to try it, and they just nailed it. So yeah, it was great. So it's a bit of a tracing the history of cruising sailing competition, if you will, as well as the story of two wonderful people putting together a race that tapped into something that a lot of people seem to need. So yeah,
very nice.
And the book, it's still out there. It's on Amazon if you want it. I think. I know Team Newport has copies of it. Yeah, it was a lot of fun to do, and writing books has to be fun to do, because otherwise it's just drudgery.
So you mentioned you have a new book in the works. Can you talk about that, or would you prefer not to?
No, I can talk about it. It's a question I always get, and that's fine. I by talking about it, I help myself, structure it and make sense of it. But I encountered a boat restoration project going on down in Rhode Island, a small boat they're called Saconnet One Designs in Saconnet Point, Little Compton area. And while that's interesting, it's always interesting to look at and follow boat restorations, wooden boat restorations. It's not really book worthy. It's kind of wooden boat magazine article worthy, but not book worthy. Replacing planking and sistering ribs and dealing with corrosion and that sort of stuff is technically interesting, but it's not a book. But what happened in this case, Bela, is that the two people involved in that restoration, kind of like Dickie Bird and Dave Kingery, are remarkably interesting people. And they are as different as you can imagine. They are stunningly different. And when you bring them together in a story to restore a little 18-foot Alden designed, one design boat, it's like there is no way that these two people would ever have met and collaborated unless that boat, in this case, had been dropped by a boatyard and broken. Unless that had happened, these two people would never have met. And so I tell the story of who they are, which is really a family story, back to our original conversation about where we learn the things, how we become what we are. So you have to tell the family stories. And these two families are stunningly interesting. One of the guys is a biomedical entrepreneur on the West Coast, Harvard educated, Harvard Medical School. I mean, just like this brilliant superstar he runs a biotech company that's now worth $4 billion. You know, it's like, whoa, this is like, I don't know what you call it, but it's just a great story, and how he got there and how he did it and what his family did, so forth. This is a terrific. The other guy is a 82-year-old Danish immigrant boatwright who left Denmark when he was 20 to come to the United States to make his fortune from a family that had a boatyard for one generation, because they got it because of World War II, and they were in the Danish resistance, and there was there were spies in the family, and they were fighting the Nazis and all.
Wow.
And the guy grew out of this thing and ended up loving to work with wood, and came to the United States, and he's restored some of the most iconic wooden sailing vessels that we have, including a National Historic Landmark, the Adventure up in Gloucester. And so these two guys somehow got together to restore a little 18-foot Sakana sloop. And so why, how, who, what, how's this going to end? And so that's the book right there.
And when is that scheduled for? What's the target publication date?
Well, yeah. So that's the unanswered question. Is I'm 3/4 of the way through the manuscript, and I'm only now starting to talk to publishers. So we'll see what happens on the schedule. Yeah. But what I'm trying to do is get the manuscript done in the next maybe couple of months. And then the way publishing works, as you probably know, is that there's a long lead time required to get to the holiday publication campaign. So and by the way, this is real publishing. This isn't like sort of publishing where people hire somebody to do the whatever. This is where you go to a publisher and they take on the risk of editing, they take on the risk of production, they take on distribution and promotion, and you help them, but this is real publishing. It's not Amazon publishing. And the way that works is there's a stake in the ground called Christmas, and the catalog, and 50% of book sales happen between Halloween and Christmas.
Right.
So you gotta get into the catalogs before the Christmas selling season starts. So I get in the catalogs, you got to be done by June. To be done by June, you have to have all the editing and writing and everything done by then. Design.
Yeah, it's a real cycle to it.
It's a real cycle, and I totally get it. It's a business. We're not doing this for fun, so they aren't. So I got to get this done by first quarter, and then we'll see what happens with the schedule. So thanks for asking. Yeah. It's like a preliminary promo on it, but I think it'll be a great read. Everybody I've talked to loves it, so we'll see.
Yeah, I a couple of episodes ago, I interviewed a person who wrote a book about the Mayflower 2, which was this person in the UK who built a replica of the original Mayflower. Sailed it across to the United States and stuff. And so there's a couple of episodes ago. Yeah, so that was interesting as well.
Well, book writing is good, and it's fun, but it's a lot of work. You have to really enjoy what you're doing. And in my view, particularly when you're dealing with history, you need to know something about the subject. So I do look for, just like you do on your podcast, I look for people who have a right to an opinion, or who have sort of knowledge of the area, domain knowledge, as they say. So sailors writing about sailing makes sense to me, and I'm proud that I can bring both, my sailing background to stories like these, the Marion-Bermuda story, the Deer Isle story, or this restoration story, and combine it with a discipline of a credentialed historian. So, I don't. It's you can go a little too far with that, but I think there's wisdom in that. So I like sailors writing about sailing.
Yeah,
I like that.
Yeah,
that always makes sense to me.
I agree. Right, you bring a perspective that someone who doesn't, whether it's sailors writing about sailing or whether it's mountain climbers writing about climbing mountains. Right. There's an insight that you bring, which is different than someone who doesn't do it.
Right.
Hey, so we've been chatting here for a while, so I want to start wrapping it up. Is there anything I have not asked you that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Oh, I don't think so. It's been great. It's been delightful. No, we've covered just about everything. I don't have any secret books I have written or something. But I do, back to your original question, I do worry a little bit about sailing. I think it is graying. There's no question about that. And yet in this weird era of prosperity that we're in, sort of selective prosperity, I don't understand why it isn't growing more, or growing. Really, it's not even growing. And I don't think the answer is get more kids involved. I think the answer is more get people who are capable, economically capable, interested in a fun way. So there needs to be like a middle-aged opti-pram phenomenon somehow. And I know some people are working on that. I think Beneteau just came out with a pretty nice one design that's capturing some interest. And the events need to be engineered in such a way that we get the mid-career people, weekend warrior types into sailing. Because there's a dumbbell in sailing where kids are in it and they can't afford it, or they don't have the time, and then we come back when we're retired. And yet the retirement crowd is growing in number, but they're not growing as sailors. What's the point here, guys? What are we doing? What are we doing wrong? So,
well, I think there's two levels of sort of commitment, right? There's the financial challenge, but there's also the time challenge.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like, it's a commitment. You get a boat. It's almost like buying a cabin on a lake. I mean, you're sort of committed to that, and this is going to be what we do as a family.
Right.
And that means you got to get all sides of the family to sort of endorse that.
Right. Exactly. Everybody has to buy in.
Right. Versus, okay, we're gonna go to the beach for 4 days. All right. Even if I don't like the beach, I'll put up with it for 4 days.
Yeah.
Or right. We're gonna go skiing for a week. All right. I'll put up with it for a week. You buy a boat, it's sort of a larger step off the curb.
Maybe the answer, Bela, is chartering. I mean, maybe there needs to be an answer to that. Try it before you buy it. And I think with chartering, we're making it more and more difficult. And I don't know the ins and outs of the chartering business by any means, but I hear, got to have insurance. You got to have this license, that license and stuff. I mean, the water is dangerous, but it isn't scary, for Pete's sake. So I think Dickie Bird and Dave Kingery were onto something by saying, you know what, we can have competent cruising sailors go to Bermuda. Beforehand, it was like, no way, you have to have.
It's too dangerous, right?
Too dangerous. People die out there. Well, yeah, but people die of heart attacks and getting hit in the head with a boom most of the time. And it's very, very, very rare. So I think there's an element of that. Sailors cultivate the mystery and dangers of sailing, and I'm not sure that that's the right message. I think the right message is more of the aesthetics and the joy and the fun and the social aspects of it.
Right. Which is a big part of it.
Oh yeah,
I think. And I'm except for maybe one long cruise, one multi-day, week-long cruise, passage every 2 or 3 years, I'm pretty much a day sailor. We untie the boat from the dock. We sail around Narragansett Bay or go out in the Buzzards Bay, and we come back.
Yeah.
And that works great for us.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, that's the way to do it then. That's what you ought to be doing.
So here again, sailing has a lot of different ways that you can get engaged in it, whether it be going to the sailing club on Wednesday nights to sail around on a sunfish,
right,
all the way up to going from Marion to Bermuda. That's a broad spectrum. So there's a lot of opportunity there. And how do you get people to sort of experience those various different elements to say what's best for them?
Right.
It takes a while.
Well, the other thing, sorry, we're riffing on this, but I think the other thing to think about is there are a lot of ways to push your body across the water when you look at,
Right.
Ranging from, a Hinckley yawl or a whatever to, a kiteboard or a foiling kiteboard. I mean, those
Right.
things are a hoot. I've never done it, and Lord knows I never will, because I'd probably break something. But I think one of the things we need to think hard about is what is sailing, and is it just because the analog is skiing and
Snowboarding.
Burton came in with a snowboard and absolutely
Right.
revolutionized the sport.
That's right.
Right. And you can do tele skiing, you can do alpine skiing, you can do snowboarding, you can do boogie boarding, you can do this, that. You got disabled people on skis, and stuff like that. If you broaden the definition of sailing to include things like kiteboarding and windsurfing, or what do you call it? Whatever. Maybe that's one approach, and somehow that ecosystem can produce more people who want to sail to Bermuda eventually. So just chatting, but I think it is an issue for the sport. The races are getting smaller. Marion-Bermuda certainly has gotten smaller, but we have the 50th coming up, and maybe it'll be a big year.
A big one. Yeah, cool.
Hope
Hey,
so.
Mark, it's been absolutely marvelous chatting with you.
Thank
I
you.
really appreciate you taking the time to share your story with our listeners. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
I enjoyed it, Bela. Thank you very much.
Bela, what a great interview. You two covered a lot of ground in a short amount of time. What were your main takeaways?
We've had several guests discuss the Marion to Bermuda race on the show. And I find it interesting that it's an amateur race that's been around for a long time. And I talked about this in one of our other episodes, right? It just sort of exists. No one's making money off of it. So the motivation to do it and to host it and to organize it, which these things take a lot of time and effort, is truly just one of people's personal passion to want to do something like this. So there's a much more famous, maybe that's not right, but there's a Newport to Bermuda race, which is one that you can find multi-million-dollar boats racing with paid crews, very, very competitive. And the whole idea of the Marion to Bermuda race is that it's a bunch of amateurs who wanted to basically have the same experience, but wanted to sort of do it with a whole bunch of other amateurs and sort of do it that way. So I thought that was kind of neat. And the other thing I think about is, interesting enough, they have a category in the Marion to Bermuda race that is sextant navigation only. So you can't use your GPS. So you got to use a sextant. And, I think about, boy, what would I do, if I was going on long distance sail and I was trying to sail from, New York down to Florida using just a sextant? Well, I know if I just go south for a couple days, and then if I turn west, eventually I'll hit land. So, that's pretty easy. But Bermuda's a little dot in the freaking ocean. You have to be accurate, or you can miss it. And that's where my hat's off to these folks who kind of navigate with a sextant, because it's not a precise thing. I mean, my understanding is if you're within 10 miles, you're happy, right? You feel accomplished. Well, some of these islands are not all that big, and if you're going to miss it. So anyway, my hat's off to it. Hats off to people who do this. And just to be clear, amateur does not mean it's not serious. There are plenty of amateurs who take this very, very seriously, which is wonderful. But I think this is an event, the Marion to Bermuda race is an event where you can be super serious about it, or you can be, there's a spectrum of seriousness that is available for people to participate in this race. Anyway, what did you think, Mike?
Totally agree. And again, we've talked about this a few times, but the community of sailors that get together and organize things like this on a regular basis over long periods of time is just amazing to me. That without money, like you said, right, without sponsorship or whatever, people just do this to be engaged with each other and do this because they love doing it.
Right.
So again, kind of hats off to that. And just that's just such a cool concept in 2025 that we do things not for big money or for, being on the front page of a magazine or a newspaper or everything viral on TikTok, right? That this is just, hey, to go and be with people and do something in common that we love. So I thought that was the first thing that's just awesome. The second piece that's related to this about Mark's stories about how he came to write his books about his experiences was really fascinating. Kind of what's your level of interest in the history of sailing, and kind of, how do you go about learning and reading and picking books out? What's your take on this, Bela?
That's a good question, Mike. I was not a big history buff through my formal education. But I do like these books that provide a historical perspective about things that you didn't learn in history class. Right? Nobody talks about, the America's Cup race and how they went to the New York Yacht Club went to Deer Isle up in Maine to recruit. I mean, I didn't know that. And there's probably, you can't find it unless you have someone like Mark who digs into it and writes a book about it. Same thing with this Marion-Bermuda race. Yeah, people know that it goes on, but nobody sort of captures that and documents it. It doesn't go into the National Archive. People are not writing history books about it because it's not something that's going to get taught anyplace. So I like these sort of nonfiction books that talk about past events that are not momentous in our overall history. Right? It didn't change the world. The Marion-Bermuda race didn't change the world. But still, those are the things that I sort of like and tend to gravitate to. And that's what intrigued me about having Mark as a guest on the show, because he's sort of written 2 books about things that are related to sailing, which I enjoy, and give you a perspective of how sailing was not that long ago.
Yeah, they're interesting people that deserve their stories to be kind of told even after they're gone. And I think we can learn things from this, right? About ourselves, or to motivate, or about sailing, right? That there's you can learn from the past. So to preserve that and to share that, I think, is a gift that maybe we don't always we're not always aware of, or not always fully grateful for. So I think this is cool. And I think that no matter what your passion is, it's neat to read about the people who came before you, who allowed you to do what you do today, right? And to remember some of those people, and books are great for that.
Yeah.
Last
especially these types of books, at least in my mind, right? These ones that provide this historical perspective on things that I didn't learn in history class.
Yep, exactly. The context and the characters and the people, and it's all neat. Last question for you. Another subject you 2 touched on that I really am interested in is about the future of sailing, right? How do we make sure that the sport that everybody loves, that listens to our podcast, I think, right, is carried on for the next generation? What ideas do you have, and maybe how can we get our listeners more engaged in this discussion?
That's a good question, Mike. And I don't know what the answer is about getting more people involved or getting our listeners involved. If listeners have ideas, or listeners would like to come on the podcast and sort of talk about their perspective of sailing as a recreational activity, and what are its challenges going forward with keeping folks involved, that might make a good episode to sort of take a deeper dive on that.
Maybe that's a theme we can cover in the next year. If we're recording this in early January 2026, and maybe that could be something we focus on, because I think it's a noble goal, and I think it's an important goal, and it has ramifications beyond just sailing. It's like, the students I teach, right, the center of their world is their phone. You know, right? And I think phones are great and they serve a useful purpose, but it's like TV, people whose focus in their life was just TV miss out on so many cool opportunities. So how do we make sure things, not just sailing, but other things that get us in touch with nature and get us in touch with other humans, how do we make sure that those are still in demand and wanted and feasible for others to enjoy in the coming decades?
As you were saying that, it reminded me of something that I remember saying many, many years ago, and someone looking at me like, "What are you, nuts?" I think I was in like my 20s or maybe early 30s, and I forget where I was working, and there was a bunch of people who were super interested in football and watching football on Sunday afternoons, right? And so Monday morning at work, the conversation was everything football. Which teams did well, whose teams won, and I never got into that. And somebody once asked me, like, "Bela, what's wrong with you? Why don't you like football?" And I said, "I like doing things, not watching things." And that goes very well with your comment about phones. Phones are all about watching things. They're not about doing. And to me, the doing is a much richer experience I'd rather play flag football with 10 other people than watch a real football game, right? Because to me, it's a more rich, fulfilling, rewarding experience. So how do we get people to engage in sailing, I think is a challenge, particularly with all the demands on people's lives. And I think we need to figure out, the industry needs to figure out how it's going to be able to take an activity which traditionally people do for a week. They go charter a boat, or they do for a whole day because they go out sailing for the day. And people's time is getting sliced up into smaller and smaller bits. So how can we engage them? How can people be engaged with smaller slices of time? Because we can't wait till people are retired like myself, who can go sailing for 3 or 4 days without any problems. It's going to be tough to sustain the industry and the sport.
Yeah,
anyway,
you got to learn it earlier. And Mark made this, the great point. We've talked about it before. It takes a lot of money in a lot of situations to own a boat and to maintain a boat. How can we find ways to make it accessible to people without a lot of money, especially early on? Maybe they'll make money over time, right, and be able to afford it. But early on, there's got to be some creative solutions, and we have a bunch of smart listeners. So
yeah, that'd be great. So listeners,
the
challenge is laid. Right, the challenge is laid. So if you have some great ideas about how we can do that, reach out to us. Let us know. We'll have you on the show. So, Mike, time to wrap this one up.
Absolutely, Bela. Listeners, thanks for joining us for yet another episode. And we hope that you found our conversation with Mark interesting and thought-provoking, just like we did. As always, please feel free to contact us about this topic or any other topic, well, any other reasonable topic, at sailingtheeast, that's all one word, @gmail.com.
And if you enjoyed the podcast, please hit that like or follow button on your favorite podcasting app. And as I've mentioned before, the podcast can now also be found on YouTube. So that's it for today's episode. Hope to see you out there on the water soon. So until next time, signing off from upstate New York. Take care.
And from over here in Münster, Germany, thanks for listening, and we'll see everybody next time.
All right, Mike.
Nicely done.